The Diesel Performance Podcast contains explicit language.
Thank you for joining us again. This is Paul Wilson.
And this is Chris Emke.
You're listening to the Diesel Performance Podcast. I just got back from Extreme Diesel Performances, Diesel Nationals, and XDP Open House. Fucking awesome, Chris.
I went a couple years ago. I can definitely contest to what you're saying.
It's not only one of the biggest shows in the country, but it's probably the most well-organized I've ever seen.
Especially over a couple days, too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a one-day event.
No. So Saturday, all day, the vendors are there like 12, 15 hours. People are there longer, much longer. They're there all into the evening. Some of the guys were telling me they didn't get out of the track until like 1 a.m.
I mean, I've been to a bunch of shows across the country over the years, and seeing some of the aerial shots with drones, the amount of trucks that are at that event, it is just insane.
The parking lot's nuts. Anything you're looking for on a diesel truck side is on one side of the parking lot, and then anything you're looking for with a semi is on the other. I finally this year, I've been 3 years now, I finally this year walked over to the semi-truck side.
It's nuts.
Holy shit.
Dude, a whole nother level.
Talk about money, bro.
Yeah, dude.
Talk about money.
Save your pennies, boys.
Yeah. Big stuff going on out there. Ton of great competitors. Got to see Levon run. Got to see Mike Graves. He was out there. I didn't get to see him run. But yeah, got to see a ton of people. Got to see a lot of great vendors. It was overwhelming. And the open house, they moved. There's 2 dynos there this year.
They were side by side this time.
They're side by side. If you haven't jumped on, and Dan and Paul, if you're listening, this is just a great video. You have to see it. Somebody tried ghetto fogging. Have you watched the video?
I was sent that photo because I'm in with the diesel crowd, so I got that video 5 minutes after it happening.
Well, you must be cool.
So before it went viral,
I watched it happen.
Right. It was the coolest thing. And then when all the other angles came out, oh, God. I literally pissed my pants.
Ghetto fogging, not a fan. Number 2.
What is it? Hold on. For the listeners.
Ghetto fogging is when you stand up in front of the intake of a truck while it's strapped down to a dyno and running. And right about as they're coming up on full throttle, you crack open the bottle and just spray the bottle of nitrous directly into the intake.
And the nitrous is pressurized, so the bottle has pressure in it, and that's what expels the gas. And we're going to leave it there.
Right. Then I will say, there is never, I want to repeat, never a reason for 2 of you to be standing there both ghetto fogging at once. Yep. That doesn't work.
Now, let's leave it there. Let's leave the suspense for the guys to look at the
Everything
video.
else you want to know, jump online, look it up. I
would probably Google XDP ghetto fog. Done. It's got to be a key search.
I bet that comes up. It was a crazy video, and to see it happen, I think you can hear me yell, "Holy fucking shit!" in the background because I screamed it and then looked down to the 3-year-old standing next to me and apologized because the XDP event, which you don't know, it is also the most family-friendly event that I've been to.
When I went a couple years ago, I can't believe all the families that went to that outing. Kids with little freebie bags trying to get stickers and little free glasses and stuff. I
used to think that was so annoying, just had a kid. Now I'm like, oh my God, they're so cute.
Exactly.
I got soft, man. I got soft.
Well, you've been soft for a while.
Big shout out, Exergy Performance. Sorry,
Performance
I'm losing
Exergy?
it. Yeah, Performance Exergy. Big shout out, Exergy Performance, being a main staple, number 1 sponsor of the show. Them and WC Fab really keeping us alive, guys. Of course, Exergy, we've been talking about it for weeks now. Their Sportsman injectors are your level 1 upgrade, your 10% overstock. You don't need a tune update on them. They're going to run in a tighter, or they're going to be calibrated to a tighter tolerance than what the factory would have done anyways, and you're getting them from the number 1 high-quality supplier of high-performance injectors in the diesel market.
Basic upgrade, right?
I feel shameless saying that, let me tell you, because we really do buy their shit. We really do run their shit. Yep. We know these guys. We love these guys. Whether or not they were a sponsor of the show, we've always given the same recommendation.
They should be a staple in any diesel build.
Yep. Same thing could be said for WC Fab. Jason Wehrli has been a longtime friend of the show. He was on probably 2 of the first 10 episodes we recorded, maybe 1 of the first 5 we ever aired. Yes, please. Jason Wehrli has the LML High Flow Intake Bundle Package. This is everything you need for maximum airflow in your LML. Let's just leave it at that, because if you don't know by now, go back and listen to our last 7 or 8 episodes. Jason's stuff is the shit. Listen to the episode with Ryan Wehrli, his brother, who has this amazing C10 build. If you've seen any of their work, you'll have no questions.
And what's funny with both of those vendors, when we talk high horsepower builds, okay? We talk about Exergy injectors. We talk about WC Fab turbo kits. We talk about engine builds, and we talk about rods, more importantly, Carrillo rods. And who better to talk about the engine components than today's guest?
Absolutely. What's funny, before we bring him on, I've never spec'd a build without Carrillo rods, and that's not just saying something nice to you,
I mean,
Bryce.
if I'm going into the bottom end of the motor, it gets rods, and they're Carrillos.
We do have Bryce on the phone. How the hell are you?
How's it going? It's good to talk to you guys. I'm glad to be a part of the show, and I too was there witnessing the ghetto fog. So that was
The ghetto fog.
From the West Coast. I'll tell you don't see that very often. So it was a quite exciting moment for me.
The guys from the Midwest and the East Coast, they just get a little too rowdy at times. That's the best way to say it.
Yeah, I know. They'd have to church that up a little bit out on the West Coast. I don't know if it would work very good.
The process or Paul's language? Which one?
A little bit of
Probably all of the above. That XDP event is such a good event, and it's great to be out there with all the other vendors and just supporting an industry that has grown so much in the last few years. And just we love seeing people use our products. And that truck, actually, I'm getting the connecting rods to that truck in the mail because they bent all of their Carrillo rods in half.
Did you not see the video? So ghetto fog, the incident occurs, and then white smoke pours from underneath the truck. He blew the motor right then and there.
Yeah.
So, a little too much fogging.
Now, were they Carrillo rods before, or were they stock rods and now they need Carrillos?
No, that motor was built by Industrial Injection back in 2015 in that truck. It had a set of our standard Carrillo rods, which are typically good for around the 1,500 horsepower mark, maybe 1,800 horsepower. But on dyno competition, guys, they want to make the torque, so they push the nitrous farther and farther and hit the button earlier. So we actually, in 2016, middle of 2016, we came up with our heavy duty Cummins rod, which is good for 3,000 horsepower. That's the guys like Sean Bach. They've been running those in all their UCC trucks and never had an issue with it. So we're going to upgrade those guys so they can get three of the team members doing the ghetto fog at the next
There you go. Bring it. That's awesome.
Oh my goodness. Bryce, we definitely appreciate you coming on the show. It really was a blast. I got sat right next to Bryce at the track.
Yep.
So all day we were sitting there enjoying all those great customers out there looking for free stickers. We always have a lot of fun at the show. Bryce, tell us, how did you get your start in diesel performance?
Or just automotive. He might not be a diesel enthusiast. I told you this, Paul.
Well, I got my start like everybody else does. I know I grew up in a family of racers. My grandparents raced. My dad always loved hot rods, and I actually really enjoyed, the hot rod stuff, mostly drag racing stuff. And then, one of my best, how I got introduced to the diesel world is one of my best friends in high school decided a long time ago that he loved the Duramax diesel, and so he spent 2 or 3 years building a twin turbo Duramax Chevelle that became pretty popular.
Hell yeah!
So that was one that became like my introduction to the diesel world. And as far as automotive experience goes, I used to own my own race engine shop building IMCA stock car, hobby stock, sprint car type engines, and some hot street stuff out in California before coming to work here at CP Carrillo.
Hell yeah! And it is CP Carrillo.
Correct. A lot of people get that confused. Their CP Carrillo is one company, CP Pistons, which has been in business since 1997, making pistons for NASCAR, all your high-end race teams. And then they purchased Carrillo rods, and then they've combined the two companies and made it CP Carrillo, and then the rest is history, and we keep moving forward.
Wow.
Gotcha.
A little bit of history there in the mix.
Yeah, so Carrillo's been around for 60-plus years, and everybody knows in the industry, like you guys talked about, if you're going to have the best connecting rod, you got to mortgage your house and buy a set of Carrillos.
That's a fact. That is a fact. You've used that pitch before.
No, this weekend I heard the guy from Soda making fun of how expensive Carrillo parts were, and I'm like,
yeah.
The least practical performance mod here is fucking rims.
Well, yeah, but Soda rims are kind of like a mid-range.
They really
That's not top of the line. Carrillos are top of the line.
Top of the line.
Well,
you want rods.
No, we'll look at it this way. This is how I explain it. The first and the last time you want to see a set of Carrillo rods is when you open the box and put them in your engine. So But you guys, you can. Everybody can talk about the cost of a connecting rod, but when the grand scheme of things, that's what's holding your entire engine together from exiting itself from your engine compartment is the actual rods. So you want to have the best quality one you can on there. And if you look at the cost per performance item, you're really not going to gain a whole bunch of horsepower by putting a Carrillo rod in. You're going to gain reliability. So that's one of those things, as the diesel world knows, everybody wants to have a 1,500 horsepower truck that they can tow their 25,000-pound trailer with and go to church on Sunday and not get yelled at in the drive-thru when they're trying to order a Big Mac.
I feel like that's the 6th time I've heard this today.
That's what we do. Everybody wants that. They want. It used to be 1,000 horsepower, but now it's 1,500, and so that's what we've really tried to do is come up with a product line that we know will be able to withstand the torque load, not necessarily the horsepower, but the torque that the diesels make is what is really hard on the beams and the stresses of the connected rod to keep them from buckling the beam or bending in half. And that's the one thing we can say. A Carrillo rod doesn't necessarily break in half like maybe a stock rod or something else. It'll actually buckle the beam or bend because of the material that the rod is made out of.
Gotcha. Okay. Give us a quick overview, Bryce. What is your role with CP Carrillo?
I am the domestic sales manager, so I help our sales staff here with new products. I go out to shows like you and trying to work with the engine builders and the end users to make our product better, because at the end of the day, we want to build the best product we can, and we can do that through customer feedback and parts feedback, and we're really big on R&D. Like we talked at the show, that's what took us so long to actually make a piston for the diesel market, is we know how to make pistons, but we've spent probably 3, maybe 4 years just R&Ding our piston before we brought it out last year at the PRI show.
Wow.
And now I'll be honest with you, because we're just a little bit into diesels, and I didn't know you guys had a piston, much less a forged piston that you guys were offering now.
Right, and that's something that, in the diesel world, most guys don't think you can run a forged piston on the street, but that's what CP has made forever. I mean, most people don't realize CP pistons, like we talked about, have been around since '97, and we make forged pistons that are in your Porsche GT. All of your KTM motorcycles have pistons that are made right here in Irvine, California at CP Carrillo. So we have a really good history of making a forged piston work in a OEM type application, which means they have to last lots of miles and they have to withstand all the torture that can go through with that. So that's why making a forged piston for us was a natural, because we know we could make it work. It just took a little time to get it done. In the diesel world, everybody has a horror story of a forged piston the first time they ran it. It's like your first blind date story, right? You put it in the engine and it just worked horrible, and they lasted 5,000 miles and it blew the top ring out of it. And that kind of really put, I think, a bad taste in the industry's mouth when it comes to diesel performance pistons. Everybody thought, oh, you can't make a forged piston live. There's no possible way it'll work. But if it's engineered right and you have the right ring package, you can actually make a forged piston work every bit as good as a cast piston without a steel ring insert on the street, which is something that most nowadays, that's kind of like the buzzword besides your injector angling, is do you have a steel top ring land in your piston?
Everybody's an expert, right?
It's really, really true. And if we really break down the components of the pistons, a cast piston and a forged piston, most cast pistons are made of a 4032 alloy, which has a higher silicone content in it, okay, over the 4030 or the 2618, which was what our pistons are made out of. So you guys all talk about pistons or piston-to-wall clearance. A cast piston runs at a tighter piston-to-wall clearance in a cold setting. So when you put that motor together, it doesn't rattle around when it warms up. That's why all the OEMs use that type of piston, because they don't have any cold starting issues. Whereas when you get to a 2618 forging, it expands at a greater rate. But once it expands and is at operating temperature, it runs at the same clearance as a cast piston. But the trick is, how do you design a piston that'll live under cold startup? And that's what we really got down to and did, is we have a piston, instead of running 12 to 14 thousandths like piston to wall clearance, which is really traditional for a forged high horsepower big boost diesel piston, we can run ours at 5.5, 6 thousandths, so the piston doesn't rock, it doesn't wear out the ringland grooves, it does a whole bunch of things in a positive way that prevents the piston from wearing itself out. Because and that's when people talk about forged pistons, they talk about top ringlands going away. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what most people don't realize is they look at a piston and they look at it and they think, oh, they don't realize the ring sits outboard of the top of the piston. So the actual ring itself is what's holding all the boost pressure, all the heat, all the compressive load of the nitrous, everything is actually forcing down on the top ringland. But then if you introduce a lot of rock, because the more clearance you give the piston, the more it rocks in the bore, rings are designed to go up and down and run in line with the ring groove. So when you start having a piston that rocks, you're putting a load on the ring and causing it to wear on the top and bottom of the ring groove, and that's what causes the ring groove to wear out. Not just the forged piston, but the way the piston works in the engine itself.
Can we back up a little bit for some of my newbies?
Yeah.
What's the difference between forged and cast?
Well, a cast piston is simple. It's like anybody can make a casting. You can watch a video on YouTube in your backyard. You can build a hole in some sand, melt some aluminum, pour it down into a casting or a mold, and that's what you have.
Going into business tomorrow, bitches. See you later.
But a forged piston, it's a little bit different principle. It has a puck that is like, it has a big puck that they put a machine that presses the piston and forges it into the shape, and it actually changes the material and the Rockwell hardness of the part. Most forged pistons are around 75 to 78 Rockwell, and some people think, well, a billet piston is better than a forged piston, when in fact it has a lower Rockwell rating. So we actually prefer forgings over billet parts because we know they're stronger and they hold up better in the field.
Is Rockwell like a hardness or a density measurement?
It's a hardness measurement of the part.
Okay. So forged, cast, billet. We don't see a lot of billet stuff out there for pistons, right, Chris? Mm-hmm. Not a real popular option that we deal with on a day-to-day. Most of my requests are for cast pistons, and what I've always told guys is if you have a street truck, you're going to run the performance cast pistons, maybe some of the other little options out there for them, right? But your basic set of performance cast pistons, all the way up to 1,000 horse, they're going to be great for a street truck. Forged pistons are going to be clattery. They're going to make a ton of fucking noise. They're going to have cold start issues.
Rebuildable every year.
Yeah, you're going to have to pull the engine down every year. Like we usually tell guys, unless you have a dedicated sled puller drag race truck where you have a team of guys or sponsors to fund it, you're probably not going to want a forged piston. Now, you're telling me all of what I just said is wrong.
Yes. In a nutshell.
Shows up on my show and tells me, fuck you.
Bryce, don't worry. Paul's told that every day.
True story.
Well, and you're not necessarily wrong, but over the last few years, things have changed.
Technology's improved.
Technology's improved. Ring packages have improved. That's why it took us, like I said, so long to develop a part, is because we wanted to develop a part that we know would go out there and be able to run 100,000 miles. I mean, we were at the show with one of our Duramax pistons that has 50,000 miles on it, and everybody looks at that part and goes, how could this be a forged piston? It looks like brand new when you have it sitting next to the other piston that's there.
It literally does.
Really?
I was there. Yeah, I actually picked it up and grabbed it and started running my dick beaters all over it. I was like, what is this thing?
Can I have it? Is it free?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, this piston, that's what I tell everybody. This piston was in a 1,200 horsepower truck that pulled a trailer, that did some drag racing, did a couple sled pulls, and the guy drove it on a daily basis. He had it for 2 years in his engine. Okay, and this is one of those things where, it's one of those, trying to get the parts back is a little bit hard when they're out there for so long, but we finally have proof. We've done a lot of dyno testing and internal testing, but to actually have real-world mileage on a part with a guy that makes that kind of horsepower, drives it every day, and there's absolutely no skirt wear, there's no ring groove deformation. The ring groove measures the exact same measurement as it does when it left the place, and that's what I think is really where the next level in the diesel performance market is because everybody wants to push the horsepower level. And as you said, you can only make 1,000 horsepower on a cast piston, right?
Yeah, we've pushed them further, but we start telling guys you have a reliability factor you're giving up on, right?
Then that's how it is. So if you could have a forged piston that could have the drivability of a cast piston, but be able to withhold 12 to 1,500 horsepower, and drive it on the street, that seems like a no-brainer to me. That's what I'd be putting in my engine.
Well, let me challenge you here. What about the cost difference?
Well, to be honest with you, retail on the parts, I don't think there's that astronomical of a cost difference.
So what
You're
Said the
probably
guy
gonna
living in
spend
California. Come on
Working at
now,
CP
listen,
Carrillo.
money bucks. I'm cheap. No, I'm just playing with you, Bryce. How much of a damage difference are we looking? Is it $1,000 difference?
I don't know what a set of cast pistons and rings is off the top of my head, to be honest with you.
Well, I do. So
okay.
what are we talking? A setup
Duramax.
with your pistons
Yep.
for a Duramax. What is the retail cost in the market?
$27.52 with rings and pins.
That's not bad, Paul.
bad.
That's
I
not
know
bad.
that's not bad.
They did their homework. They did their homework.
What-
I mean, depending valve reliefs, things like that.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's their starting price. So if they have to cut valve reliefs and things like that, I'm sure the price goes up.
Right.
No,
But-
all the pistons come with a 125,000 steep valve notch. They're all radius. They have. I mean, it's basically a race version put into a street part.
I mean, you're talking
So
$400 to $500 difference then.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of a
So-
no-brainer if it lasts as long as Bryce is saying.
Ooh.
Right, and that
Chris is challenging your integrity.
It does. Well, to be honest with you, and that is just our retail price. Obviously, there's map pricing and stuff that's out on the internet that's going to be a little bit different than that, So
Sure.
if you were going to probably order them from XDP or any of the online retailers, they're probably going to cost you under $2,500.
That's a score.
That's a score.
That's a score.
Just to be straight up, like we're already in there and tearing it apart. This is not even the most expensive part of the build, to be honest with you, by far.
No, I mean they're already springing for rods. I mean, a build like that, they're talking $5K for a crank.
Right.
$2,500 piston.
I'm just thinking one of your 3 turbos at 1,500 horsepower.
Exactly.
$3,000.
Yeah,
like one of your 3, just to be clear.
Yeah.
So that's actually that's. I don't want to say affordable because I don't want to be ignorant
it is,
to
though.
people. But
if you're
yes,
talking
in
a
this price
1,000 to
range.
1,500 horsepower build,
Yeah, that is.
and you're
yeah.
talking about these rods or these pistons, that is an affordable price tag.
Right.
It's extremely affordable.
And we have all different types of options, and we are the first, I would say, the first person in the industry in the diesel marketplace to come up with what we call our hybrid kits. It's really kind of a neat deal. We took all of the racing background from the domestic side of things and thought, how can we make a better diesel part? And that's where we came up with our hybrid kit. So, you're just like you guys were talking about. If you're going to an engine build and you're going to buy rods and pistons, why not buy a combination that works together? So what we did is, for like our Cummins parts, we have our Cummins hybrid kit, which is a 846 thousandths longer rod than stock.
Okay.
So you almost got an inch longer rod. That's good for everybody, okay? Then what we did is we took, instead of having the regular Cummins wrist pin, we took it and down to the size of the Duramax wrist pin. So that's where you see the difference in the length of the rod is basically the diameter size of the wrist pin. We move the compression height up in the piston, so the piston skirt becomes shorter. The piston becomes lighter, so now you're saving 2 pounds of rotating weight off of each cylinder.
Whoa.
My next fucking question was, what about the weight of the piston?
Yeah.
Because I would imagine forged pistons way more than cast pistons. Am I correct?
No,
other
they're
way.
about the same weight.
Oh, wow, okay.
If you really got down to it. But now think about this: like the Cummins stuff is 12 pounds off of your rotating assembly, right?
Yeah.
No lack in reliability. Nothing changes. Everybody in the diesel world thinks you need bigger parts, but as you take the weight off, you don't need the bigger parts because you're not trying to fling around an extra 2 pounds on the end of your crank, on the end of your piston pins, all that kind of stuff.
It's the momentum. I mean, you think 2 pounds,
Yes.
guys, to most guys out there, it's only a couple pounds. But you got to think about that. It's like a wheel. You change the size of the wheel or you change the height of your tire, that's more rotating weight. That's more than just the whatever it weighs on a scale.
Yeah.
Right.
This is not about race weight,
No.
right? This is, like you said, this is about
Reliability.
inertia.
Yeah, this is
reliability,
reliability.
right?
Right, and the cool thing about the hybrid kits is when you take the weight off of the crank and you take the weight out of the piston, we find that turbos spool faster, the engines rev quicker, they're able to turn higher RPMs. And when we got guys with our Duramax and Cummins stuff that have turned over 6,000 RPM with these things.
All the RPM.
You just made Chris and I both just cringe.
Yeah,
you know how
man.
many
You know
calls
how many
we're going to have
questions we
on
get?
Monday for can I
need
run
more
6,000 RPM?
Yeah, dude.
You can, you just need the right parts.
Bryce. all right. I'll give you that, Bryce, but we're going to have to edit this part out. I will agree with that. It's about the right selection of parts, and you know what?
There are times.
A disclaimer.
Yeah.
Does everyone need 6,000 RPM? No, guys, you don't. It's about the build and the purpose, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a stock turbo truck doesn't need 6,000 RPM. Am I right, Bryce?
Well, I don't know. I'm an RPM guy, so
God
the cool
damn it,
thing
Bryce.
about the cool thing about that other than the RPM is the turbo spool. A lot of guys like to run big single turbos,
Right.
but because they don't spool as fast, they're not as fun to drive around, or they don't work as good at the track, right? So with the hybrid kit stuff, because the parts are lighter, you're able to get a larger turbo to spool quicker and react faster, which makes you go faster down the track, or whatever you're trying to do horsepower-wise, it just makes it a lot easier.
Have you guys put any measurements around that as far as like, I don't even know, like idle RPM
right.
up to 4,000 RPM, and like measured a difference in the amount of time it takes, or anything as far as that?
We have some guys who have some testing data on that. The biggest thing that people are amazed at is just how quick the engines rev. I think the most interesting thing is the guys who run the Cummins hybrid kits, they talk about how the balancers in a Cummins get hot after they run because they're working so hard, where you can barely touch your hand to them. They put the hybrid kit in there, and they can touch the balancer, and it doesn't run as hot because it's not working as hard. So that's a really big telling side of how much that extra weight hurts. It's just hammering the bearings, hammering the pins, all that stuff. So there's a lot of, it's hard to say quantifiable things that by taking all that load off makes such a big difference,
Gotcha. I dig it. Okay.
So now, would you sit there and we
Yeah.
could be confident in saying that one of the new style forged pistons and the engineering, the technology, everything that's behind it, we could put it up against the cast piston in the same type of life expectancy?
I think so. I mean, obviously we haven't gone 100,000 miles yet, but we're working our way there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But the testing that we've seen and the return parts and just all the ring grooves, the pin bores, all that stuff shows that it is just going to keep going for the life of the cast piston. Obviously, if you do stupid things like the ghetto fog and all those other cool tricks that are out there, that does lower the life expectancy of the parts. Everybody asks, what's the warranty on a Carrillo rod? Well, it's warranted against craftsmanship, but we can't fix installation error, and sometimes you just can't fix stupid, I
know I got off the phone with a gentleman today, and he was talking about doing a 1,000 horsepower build, and we kind of discussed price a little bit, rough estimates, and he goes, well, what's the warranty? I go, you want me to warranty a performance build? I was like, the craftsmanship. I go, but if 10,000 miles down the road something happens, I mean, you built a 1,000 horsepower truck.
To beat on it. You didn't buy
right.
I love this question, too, about warranty.
Right.
Like, this is like we get guys on, hey, can I get my injectors honed out to 60%? What's the warranty? Well, the warranty is that it's done right.
Right.
That's the promise. But you're buying and building these trucks to abuse them.
Correct.
When you want to abuse something, you can't ask, what are you going to promise? Well, I promise it was built correctly.
Now, one of the things I want to kind of address, too, is, it's understanding your roots, right? And you guys, you've already said that you've done a lot of forged pistons for some, high-end gas platforms and KTM, like bikes you're referring to.
Yes.
What have you seen lifespan out of the gas world?
The gas world, it's all comes down to cold startup. Obviously, if you looked at a Porsche GT3 911, those have to go hundreds of thousands of miles.
Right.
I mean, there's, obviously a guy's not going to drive his Porsche, 100,000 miles overnight, but that's what is required to get that OEM type of contract,
right.
is the reliability of the part. And that's the same engineering that is put into our diesel pistons. So it's one of those things where we already know that we can make a part last that long. Just how could we make it work in the diesel world? And one of the main key is the ring itself and the ring groove. That's one of the things that most people don't talk about, but over the last 3 years, the ring technology has changed enough to be able to withstand the abuse, the cylinder temperatures, the load, all the stuff I talked about earlier in a daily driven application.
I love it. Okay, so we know if you're going near or over 1,000 horsepower, or if you're ever going to go over 1,000 horsepower, forged pistons sounds like it's just a hands down slam dunk, right? Like, that's a great idea to match that up with that customer. Who should not?
I would agree. I'm a little bit biased. I would agree, but I would agree with you on that. But it's just one of those things like we tell people every day. This is the same question you guys probably deal with. Is if a guy's going to tear his engine down, okay, the expense of getting the motor out of the car, going to the machine shop, going through everything, and you were going to build it, I would say build it to be 3 times stronger or 10 times stronger than you ever thought you needed it to be. Because what always happens is we see guys who build the bottom end, but then the next biggest turbo comes out or the new tune comes out, and then they were like, oh, I only wanted to make 800 horsepower, but now they want to make 1,200 horsepower 3 years down the road.
Yeah, very true.
If you put the parts in to begin with, then it's not an issue. That way you don't have to do it twice.
Is there anybody who should not run forged pistons? Is there a situation where a customer calls in and is like, hey, I blew up my engine, I'm going to rebuild it, I need some Carrillo rods, what pistons do you have? And you're like, you know what, sir, you don't need the forged.
To be honest with you, the reliability that we've seen in testing in the forged piston, I really don't think there's a downside to it. Other than the guy who's rebuilding his Winnebago, but he's not going to put forged. He's not going to put our rods in his Winnebago engine. He's just going to rebuild it to stock specs. You know what I'm saying?
Kristen, you just buy a Winnebago?
I did. No. I feel insulted.
Bryce, you've been such a wealth of knowledge for us. We really appreciate you taking out your some time out of your busy schedule to help us out on the podcast today. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think the main thing would be that just make sure that if you're going to do your engine build, that you guys do your homework. I know you guys talk a lot. I listen to a couple of your guys' podcasts, and the more information you can get before you purchase a part, the more knowledge you can have, the better off you're going to have, success you're going to have in your engine build. And the diesel world, in the grand scheme of things, is kind of like the Wild West, where we're all still learning what these things are capable of and how the parts are going to last under all these extreme conditions. And so we're constantly trying to improve at CP Carrillo to make a better part, to make a more reliable part, to make something that's going to hold up to all the abuse you could put to it. And that's what I think is cool, is there's a lot of innovation happening in the diesel truck world, which most people in the higher end racing world think we're crazy because they're like, it's a diesel truck. But when you really get down to the physics and the nature of what these engines can do and what these trucks can do, it's absolutely amazing to me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much again for joining us, Bryce. This has been Paul Wilson.
And this is Chris Emke.
Thanks for listening.
Calibrated Power Solutions, the leading North American developer of clean diesel power and home of DuramaxTuner.com, is the proud sponsor of the Diesel Performance Podcast. Calibrated Power develops emissions-equipped calibrations for a wide variety of diesel powertrains, including the Duramax, Cummins, Jeep, John Deere, and many more. For more information and the best customer service in the industry, check out calibratedpower.com or call 815-568-7920. That's 815-568-7920. If you'd like to contact the Diesel Performance Podcast, send us a message through Facebook or email paul@duramaxtuner.com or Chris at CEHMKE@duramaxtuner.com. You can also reach him by phone. Chris's extension is 2121, Paul's is 2122.
You can build a hole in some sand, melt some aluminum, pour it down into a casting or a mold, and that's what you have.
Going into business tomorrow, bitches. See you later.
So